With only one more wet dress rehearsal to come, or so we think, SpaceX is preparing ship, booster, and the launch pad for Flight 12. SpaceX has also dropped some brand new Flight 12 information on their website. You'll Thank Me Later has been completely reworked with a roof and a door, and Starships are flying from Louisiana? We have a lot to discuss this week as we prepare for Flight 12. From Florida Space Coast to South Texas, we have all of this coming up and more on this week's Starship Update. As discussed in last week's episode, SpaceX concluded a wet dress rehearsal for Flight 12 on their second try. After boarding on the first attempt, it looks like the tower vent was venting its exhaust too close to the tower and freezing important components. SpaceX was forced to install a longer tower vent that will direct its exhaust safely away from the tower. With the wet dress rehearsal now complete, it was time to destack Ship 39 and Booster 19, followed by the transport of both vehicles back to the production site. SpaceX is putting the finishing touches on Ship 39 and Booster 19, though 39 has had a little extra adventure in there. One of the finishing touches for Ship 39 was apparently a rollout to Massey's. On Thursday, a static fire stand rolled inside Megabay 2 to pick up Ship 39 for a roll of Massey's on Friday night. Following that, it was hooked up to the SQD over the truss structure. Later on that day, we saw the tank farm activate and Ship 39 was loaded with cryo. Since we didn't see any water clouds coming from the trench, it's likely that SpaceX performed either a spin prime or an igniter test. With testing done, SpaceX rolled Ship 39 back to the production site after final testing here. Together with a wet dress rehearsal, more on that later, and a launch to follow, SpaceX is in a race against the clock to get everything ready in time before launch. But all this being said though, so far, seeing the launch date pushed back a few days wouldn't be the most surprising. Something important to remember though, is the following weekend is right before Memorial Day. That means SpaceX is not allowed to close the beach during that weekend or on Memorial Day Monday itself. So, if SpaceX pushes Flight 12 beyond Friday the 22nd, the next earliest launch opportunity would be Tuesday the 26th. Earlier this week, we saw SpaceX had 2 man lifts inside the trench at Pad 2. One of them was inspecting the ridge cap of the flame trench, the top part of the flame diverter. This could be due to the booster's 33 engine static fire test and or the wet dress rehearsal. Now that the full stack isn't fully stacked anymore, SpaceX now has some time to inspect it. With the work inside the trench seemingly complete, SpaceX conducted a deluge test. This time, the top deck was activated once again. This is the first time since the deluge anomaly that the top deck has been activated. And to finish off the launch site preparations, SpaceX performed a few other deluge tests, like 2 per day for a period of time.
Here it comes! Woo!
What's noticeably different though this time compared to earlier tests was the test lasted much longer and the geyser shot much higher and farther away as well. But now, down to real business. SpaceX has confirmed the net, or no earlier than date, for Starship's 12th flight as May 20th. But we were surprised to see that 2 beach closures have appeared on the city of Starbase's website though. Both closures were scheduled for the 17th and 18th of May. 1 and 2 days before the launch date, and both listed for spaceflight activities. These specific closures have since been revoked though, with the launch date slipped from the 19th. But regardless, these indicate that SpaceX wants to conduct at least one more round of testing for both booster and ship in a full stack configuration. Ship 39 completed testing at Massey's and was rolled back to the production site early on Saturday morning, and was then transferred onto the ship transport stand. While inside Megabay 2, it also received its Starlink simulator payloads. This time, SpaceX used the actual Starlink loader to load these payloads onto Ship 39. Now, alongside all of the work that they are currently doing to prepare for launch, SpaceX has also officially confirmed that they are targeting the launch of Starship Flight 12 this week. But what's exactly happening on Flight 12? And what's new? Flight 12 serves as a major step in the evolution of Starship. SpaceX has introduced brand new designs for both booster and ship from the ground up, both also sporting brand new Raptor 3 engines. This stack once again breaks the record for the world's tallest rocket at 124 meters tall, or about 407 feet, and also for the heaviest rocket at over 5,500 tons when fully fueled. The upgraded booster has been stretched by about an extra meter, and the hot staging ring is now fully integrated. The aft bulkhead is now also a plate that's welded almost at the aft end of the vehicle. These 2 major changes in design have allowed SpaceX to increase propellant capacity on the booster by a few hundred tons. The booster now also features a very large transfer tube, nearly the size of a Falcon 9 first stage booster, just for method methane to travel from its main tank down to the engines. This allows them to ignite all of the engines at once, and on boost back it allows for a much faster and more efficient flip maneuver. Another major change to the booster has to do with how certain hardware is packaged. For example, the aerodynamic chines have been redesigned with different lengths for optimal aerodynamic performance during entry, and to further reduce descent speed ahead of landing burn. The aft end is also packed with pressure lines for the autogenous pressurization system coming from the engines, along with control boxes and other systems that were previously scattered across other areas of the vehicle. And of course, we cannot forget about the sweet new black livery on the aft end. It does look pretty cool. With the introduction of Raptor 3's design, we've also seen the removal of almost all shielding around the engines, with some minimal protective covers in critical areas of the engine and the aft section. Super Heavy is now also flying with 3 grid fins in a T shape instead of 4 grid fins in an X shape. These are not only larger and therefore more capable, but the brand new orientation also optimizes control of each grid fin, with one specialized for yaw control and the other 2 for pitch and roll. The booster catch points are also now integrated into 2 of the 3 grid fins instead of being separate, simplifying both design and operations. All of these changes allow for improved performance and a more simplified design, which helps a lot when it comes to reuse. For this flight in particular though, Booster 19 will not be flying back to the launch site for a catch. It will instead attempt a similar flight profile out in the Gulf. This isn't surprising though, given it's the first flight of a version 3 booster and also the first flight from Pad 2. Both the vehicle and the pad need to be demonstrated before advancing. Regarding ship, it hasn't changed much in terms of length like it did with version 2, but SpaceX still found ways to increase propellant capacity. They lowered the aft and common bulkheads just a smidge, allowing for slightly larger tanks that can hold an extra 100 tons of propellant. This also means the Raptor vacuum engines are now recessed into the LOX tank in special enclosures. Just like on the booster, the aft end of the ship has also been greatly simplified, and most of the heavy shielding is now gone, reducing dry mass. Some of the most important changes to the version 3 ship have to do with its future missions in space. For example, the entire thrust system has been revamped, with more vents facing in different directions for better control of the ship while in space. Additionally, and a first in the Starship program, Ship 39 is flying with 4 docking drogues that will be used by ships in the future for docking to depots for in-orbit refilling. We expect that in a future mission, we'll see a ship equipped with 4 probes, aka the active side of the docking system. For version 3, SpaceX also got rid of the old sockets that were used for lifting the ship, and they now use the catch pins instead. These are going to be tested on this mission, not just for stacking, but also to see whether these pins can survive re-entry, and there is no other way to test than to go fly. The heat shield itself is also a crucial piece of the Starship puzzle. Without it, Starship does not make it home. Recall the white tiles we saw on Ship 39 last week? SpaceX said these are actually for image referencing that will be performed during this mission. For this flight in particular, Ship 39 will be deploying 22 Starlink V3 simulators that will be deployed during the coast phase, and 2 of them are fitted with cameras to perform imaging of the heat shield. This will allow SpaceX to develop methods in the future where they may have to check the heat shield before the ship returns. Kind of like how the Space Shuttle performed a backflip maneuver known as the rendezvous pitch maneuver for heat shield analysis, especially around the space station. And speaking of Starlink deployment, the PEZ dispenser has also been upgraded to be faster. So now, we'll see double the number of Starlink simulators deployed in roughly the same amount of time compared to before. According to SpaceX, this new version of ship also includes vacuum jacketed coverage of the header tank feed system, a cryogenic recirculation system, and a dedicated system for managing cryogenic propellant interactions with the engines during extended coasts in space, which is kind of important. These are critical to enable Starship to travel for long-duration missions, such as propellant aggregation flights, flights to the moon, to Mars, and of course, well beyond. And all of this is on board for Flight 12. If all goes well here, it should all look very similar to Flight 11. This is because Flight 12 aims to validate version 3 design and that it can still perform the same tasks as before and establish a baseline. So, as mentioned before, no booster catch, just like on Flight 11. On top of ship deploying Starlink simulators, it will also perform an in-space relight test of one of its sea-level Raptor engines, then demonstrating cross-range maneuvers during re-entry before splashing down in the Indian Ocean. And as much as we say Flight 12 should look like Flight 11, there are 2 major changes compared to before. The first of which is a brand new trajectory. While previous flights aimed for a straight east trajectory from Starbase, eventually threading the gap between Florida and Cuba, Starship will instead head southeast, flying between Cuba and the Yucatan Peninsula. This new trajectory will be very useful in the future to deploy Starlink satellites into the already approved 32-degree inclination orbital shell, and will allow rendezvous and docking with ships launched from Cape Canaveral. The other thing that's changing here is the ship's landing burn. Normally on previous flights, the ship would ignite 3 engines for the landing burn, and then after the flip, down select to just 2 of them. But with the higher thrust Raptor 3, 2 engines might produce too much thrust to efficiently decelerate the ship, especially towards the end of the burn when it should be close to the chopsticks. So for this flight, the ship will cut down from 2 engines down to just 1 near the end of the landing burn, just like we saw SN10 do back in the old SN suborbital hop days. Good times. Now, obviously there are a ton of reasons why Flight 12 is so important and what differentiates version 3 from 2 and obviously 1 before that. But that would result in a much longer video. So let's just watch it for ourselves and see what happens. Godspeed, Starship. So what should we expect on launch day? Well, thanks to pre-launch testing, we have a really good handle of how things should progress around the launch site. Thanks to some tank farm upgrades introduced with Pad 2, the chill down on the oxygen side is now much faster than before. And because they introduced vacuum jacketed lines, they can also be kept chilled for a prolonged period of time. It's a big deal. That means they can start the process several hours in advance. Close to the launch, SpaceX will start the chill down of the methane side, as well as the plumbing that runs out to the launch mount and tower. On Pad 1, there was a vent on the launch mount that indicated when this was happening. Now, instead of venting off the mount, there's a series of pipes closer to the tank farm that vent when the process is underway. But don't worry, we will still have the tower vent. In fact, that's exactly what we saw being changed last weekend after the aborted Wet Dress Rehearsal attempt. The propellant load sequence itself is also much shorter this time around. We know this from Booster 19 testing and Monday's Wet Dress Rehearsal, but now we have actual timelines from SpaceX. At T-minus 50 minutes prior to prop load, the flight director will pull all operators on their readiness to proceed into loading operations. Prop load will then start at T-minus 38 minutes and 53 seconds, with locks being loaded onto the ship. Booster locks load will then begin at T-minus 35 minutes, followed by methane load for both the booster and ship over the following 2 minutes. After loading over 5,000 tons of propellant across both Starship stages in roughly 36 minutes, the prop load sequence ceases and the rocket pressurizes itself, readying for flight. It seems like SpaceX is still keeping the optional hold point at the T-minus 40-second mark in the countdown. It's not mandatory though, so if everything checks out and they aren't working any issues, they can simply push right past that T-minus 40-second mark. At T-minus 30 seconds, the flight director will give the final go for launch, and a few seconds later, the activation of the detonation suppression system will follow beneath the launch mount. Based on the rough timings that we've seen from recent water deluge tests and the SpaceX timelines, the water deluge system should activate at T-minus 17 seconds. It will still take about 5 seconds for water to visibly come out of the bidirectional flame diverter, and the top deck deluge should activate about 6 seconds after that. Then, at T-minus 3 seconds, all 33 Raptor 3 engines aboard Booster 19 will ignite simultaneously, a major upgrade from before. Another change this time around is the rocket is actually held down before liftoff. This allows SpaceX to start all engines and ramp up to full power right away. So instead of lumbering its way off the pad only when the engines are throttled up like before, Starship will leap off the pad at T0 when the clamps open and retract into the launch mount. That leap off the pad is in fact what we tried to capture on our Flight 12 commemorative patch design available at shop.nasaspaceflight.com. It includes the brand new launch mount design, the Mega Mach diamonds, and also the old tower as a reminder of the first 11 Starship flights that paved the way to get here. We've also got pins with the same design, shirts, mugs, and so much more. Our store team has been seriously killing it lately. And while you're in the store, you might want to grab a print from any of our photographers, including yours truly. Thanks to Raptor 3's higher thrust, giving a combined 8,250 tons of thrust at liftoff, or roughly 18 million pounds, the whole stack should reach max Q about 15 seconds earlier than previous flights, which is kind of insane for a vehicle the size that Starship is. I mean, genuinely. The booster section of the flight will also be shorter as it will consume its propellant much faster and accelerate much harder. Hot staging really hasn't changed much in its essence. The booster still has to shut down all but 3 engines, the ship engines ignite while the 2 are still attached, you know the deal. What has changed though with version 3 is that in order to perform the controlled flip on the booster, they no longer need to close off part of the hot staging interface. Instead, the ship's engines will ignite in a staggered manner that should direct the booster back in a determined direction, as opposed to the previous random motion like before. The ship's thrust has also increased thanks to Raptor 3, so that means a quicker orbital insertion burn. This places ship engine cutoff almost 50 seconds earlier than before, and all of this while carrying even more Starlink simulators than any previous flight. The rest of the timeline doesn't really change by much, so the flight should end a little over an hour after liftoff as before. If all goes well with Flight 12, and we sure hope it does, it may not be much longer before we see much longer duration flights. But before Flight 12 gets off the ground in Starbase, Starship still needs a modified launch license for version 3. And this past Friday, the FAA released Starship's launch license. Finally, the modified license allows version 3 to launch from Pad 2, and the boosters are also allowed to return to the launch site for a catch. While Booster 19 will land in the Gulf, this means that SpaceX will not need a license modification for version 3 booster catches going forward, hopefully as soon as Flight 13. On the ship side, ship still needs a license modification for it to land anywhere other than the Indian Ocean. If current timelines hold up, as discussed before by Elon himself, if Flight 12 goes well, and 13 goes well going to orbit, Flight 14 could be on the docket for the very first ever on-site ship recovery from orbit right there at Pad 2. Let's go ahead and change gears a bit though. A unique notice appeared on the Port of Brownsville's website stating that Marmac 31, or aka You'll Thank Me Later, will arrive on May 24th. Earlier information listed the purpose as to load rocket booster. Now, we know Florida needs vehicles to be barged over from Starbase initially, but having one ready to ship right now seems a bit optimistic. Now, we're hoping Booster 19 will have already dipped its toes in the Gulf by then, and Booster 20 is currently the only other completed booster, or nearly, as it hasn't finished its crowd testing campaign yet. Plus, SpaceX only began stacking Booster 21 just last week. One possibility here, though, is that SpaceX will use Booster 20 to practice breaking over a booster horizontally and transporting it, using the new horizontal transporter sitting in Sanchez. When SpaceX has this process fully dialed in, Booster 20 should be brought back vertical, and Marmac 31 will head back to the Cape without a booster. However, a later update regarding the arrival of Marmac 31 at the Port of Brownsville now states to load ring walls. This refers to a transport stand. It's still unknown whether this is a ship or a booster transport stand, or both, so we'll have to wait and see which one gets rolled down to the port for transport to the Cape. But before it leaves for the Port of Brownsville, this week it received both its door and its back cover. Together with this new roof structure, these will help protect any hardware during transport, because we've already seen how bad rust can get when hardware is stationed close to the Gulf here. Now just imagine what it's like being transported across it. And speaking of the Space Coast, last week over at Launch Complex 39A, we saw a familiar geyser at the Deluge tank farm. However, we didn't see any water coming out of the actual trench itself, which means that only the tank farm side of the Deluge was tested. We'll have to keep our eye out for when SpaceX decides to test the trench and top deck of the pad, because progress is coming along really fast over there right now. Over at the tower near the chopsticks, our Space Coast live camera saw what we presume to be hydraulic fluid spraying out. Now, while some of you might know the new chopstick actuators use electric motors, the actuators for both the landing rails and the stabilizers still use hydraulic systems. So maybe one of these supply lines burst and spewed fluid all over the place, which is kind of gross actually because hydraulic fluid is nasty. We also saw the chopsticks open again. While we don't think this was their first time moving on their own power, that leak apparently did not stop them from moving at all, which is kind of awesome. More vaporizers for its own tank farm also rolled by the VAB this week. We spotted a total of 6. 2 full-size ones, and 4 smaller units. Roberts Road reached a milestone as the first tower crane at Gigabay began disassembly. This means the crane has completed the main structure of its assigned corner. The Manitowoc MLC 650, the crane that disassembles the tower crane, will also install the roof panels here. But before those roof panels are assembled, there's one important detail. As the name suggests, tower cranes contain tower sections. If SpaceX wants to use Gigabay while that tower section is still in the way, stacking a ship and booster is going to be a lot more difficult. So those have to be removed in full. With 1 Starship launch pad already operational, or nearly, and 4 under construction in various phases, SpaceX announced new plans to build yet another launch site in Louisiana. But it will take a bit of time before we see Starship launch from there though. The land SpaceX is looking into contains 136,000 acres in Vermilion Parish, south of Highway 82 and bordering the Gulf, just like the launch site here in Starbase. Something noteworthy is how remote this future launch site will be from any nearby airports though. The nearest airport is the Lafayette Regional Airport, a roughly 1 hour and 20-minute drive away. Because of this location's remoteness, we might see SpaceX building another city for workers, essentially creating the next Space Coast, or Star Coast, just like here. And yes, that's what I'm calling it. Don't hate. Safe to say this is going to be a major task for SpaceX, as the logistics in construction and operation alone are a task that are mind-bending enough at that scale. SpaceX still has to acquire the land. And while they're exploring different launch sites to increase Starship's launch cadence, actually buying the property is not what will take the longest amount of time. Once land is secured, an environmental impact statement, or EIS, needs to be conducted. We'll have to keep an eye out for when that drops, because these details normally appear without much warning. When it's released, SpaceX will have to work closely with the US Army Corps of Engineers to develop a plan for building not only a launch site, but also a full production facility here as well. I mean, this is a lot of land that we're talking about here. We're hoping to hear either from SpaceX or the US Army Corps of Engineers on exactly how many launch pads they plan on building there. Next comes the groundwork. While we don't know exactly what kind of layout will be needed in Louisiana, we do know the land there is very swampy. Very similar to the Space Coast and here, but that comes with the territory building anything near a major body of water like the Gulf. SpaceX will probably start by filling the land with sand dredged from the Gulf. Once filled, they can then compact the ground with dirt. This is the exact same process that NASA used during the construction of both Launch Complex 39A and 39B for the Apollo program. NASA used dredged sand to build a 24-meter tall pile to compact the ground beneath it. We expect this process in Louisiana to take a considerable amount of time considering the scale of what SpaceX wants to achieve here. After the ground has settled, SpaceX can begin removing the excess dirt and begin foundation work. Not just for launch pads though. SpaceX has to build everything from scratch, taking all of the lessons learned from version 1 and version 2 of Starship, plus what they may still learn from version 3 and beyond. Now, while we think it'll take at least a decade before Starship actually flies from there, what about you? Let us know in the comment section down below. It's time for our McGregor Minute, or minute-ish, because we've already covered so much so far. With SpaceX preparing for Flight 12, future vehicles, and future launch sites, over at McGregor, Raptor 3 work continues ferociously. And yet again, SpaceX rolled out a brand new Raptor 3 engine spotted by our cameras, which you can follow 24/7 over at McGregor Live. This week's record serial number is Raptor 168, a sea-level Raptor, likely destined for a booster down the line. With Booster 19, Ship 39, and the pad all being readied, and Flight 12 quite possibly just a few days away, what excites you most about this flight? How successful do you think Flight 12 will be? And when do you think we'll see Flight 13 if all goes well? Let us know in the comment section down below. I'm Max Evans for NSF. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch y'all in the next one.